According to today's guest, we are heading towards stagflation, a situation not seen in the US since the late 70s at the time of Jimmy Carter. These are the thoughts of Todd Bubba Horwitz. Todd has over 40 years of experience as a professional trader. He is a member of the CME and is the author of Bubba's Guide to Trading Options. We are delighted to welcome him onto GoldCore TV for the first time. Todd spoke to GoldCore's Dave Russell just a few days ago, and boy, did they cover some ground. From the rock and a hard place that the Fed finds itself in, to the impact on the housing market, the Green New Deal, the oil price, and, of course, the price of both gold and silver. If the conversation between Dave and Todd makes you want to hear even more insight and analysis, then be sure to click subscribe. And please let us know what you think, either in the comments below or tweet us at GoldCore. We love to hear from you. And do not forget the M3 Report, our flagship show, the show where we discuss the economy, precious metals, markets, and money, and bring you exclusive insights from experts around the globe, as well as more commentary and some silliness from the GoldCore team. But don't dash off just yet. First, enjoy this interview with founder and CEO Todd Bubba Horwitz.
Todd Bubba Horwitz, welcome to GoldCore TV.
Dave, it's great to be here. It's great to meet you, and it's a pleasure to be on with you this morning.
It's a pleasure to have you too. Now, I'm going to start off with a question. The question is that the Fed seems to be stuck between a rock and a hard place at the moment. They can continue to hike rates and probably kill the economy, or they can cut rates, they can pivot, further fuel inflation, and ultimately kill the economy. What's the most likely thing that they're going to do you think? And what should they do, in your opinion?
Well, first of all, the Fed has totally butchered this entire operation to begin with, which is why we should probably abolish the Fed. But on to the question that you asked, they're going to have to keep continuing to hike rates. I mean, unfortunately, they've created a situation of taxation without representation. That's what we're doing. That's what inflation is anyways. And there's never been a Federal Reserve that has actually hiked rates into a recession. Now, we have changed the bar on what a recession is, but we are in a recession. We are in a global recession, and central banks shouldn't be doing anything right now, but they're so far behind the curve that now they're chasing to try to get caught up. I mean, the fact of the matter is that if the United States would just drill oil, okay, there would be no more issue to speak about. Oil would take care of all the inflation, would take care of everything, and it would take the Fed off the hook. But I think you really have a central banking system around the globe that is actually trying to destroy the middle class and head out for what we call the Great Reset. And I think that's the bigger problem and the underlying problem underneath all of this.
And that's a deliberate ploy to destroy the middle class, you think, yeah?
I do. Look, I think you have governments around the world that have spent so much money and they've gone so deep in debt. They've got their central banks that have printed at ridiculous rates. Okay, and if you look at what goes on, the governments and the Federal Reserve or central banks, they create nothing but more debt. They are running a legalized Ponzi scheme at this moment. Now, you can debate whether or not it's legal or not, but they are running a Ponzi scheme in any case.
And what's the natural conclusion? Where does this go to then if they continue to hike rates as they are? I mean, that's not sustainable from the economy's point of view whatsoever. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Of course I agree. I think it goes into stagflation, which is obviously the worst of all the inflationary or all the flations. It would be stagflation, which brings us back to Jimmy Carter in 1979, 1978, which interest rates go spiraling out of control and nobody's working. Which obviously means that the economy is stagnant and is doing nothing. And I think that's kind of where we're headed. This is kind of like the grand old plan. If you take into account the food shortage that we're going to have and the lack of capital that many people are going to have, it is creating a monster disaster that we continue to ignore. But of course, the one nice thing of being in the United States is that there's an election every 2 years. So there is a chance for that to change direction before it gets too much further out of control.
There's a few things that you've touched on there, but the first thing, you're very much of the opinion they continue to hike rates. There's a lot of talk, a little bit of sentiment at the moment that we could see a pivot. You think that's off the cards, do you?
I don't think there's any pivot coming. I think they're going straight up. I think they're dead set on getting this 10-year over 4%. And I mean, solidly over it. It did last week. It did go over 4% for a few minutes or so, but it came back down. You already have in the States, and I live in part-time in Nevada. Right now, if you buy a new home in Nevada, you've got to be able to qualify for a 7.5% mortgage. Okay. Wow. So there's no plan on rate reduction in my view. In my view, they're going up again at the next meeting, another 3/4 or a full point once again. And again, this is all part of, I think, of a grander plan of destruction.
And that 7.5% mortgage that you have to qualify for, put that in context. Where was that this time last year, say, for example?
3.25.
Wow. Okay.
I'll put it this way. I bought a home for my son because I residence in two places. And he needed a place, so we bought him a home. And I squawked it at 3.5% interest rates. Okay, they're going to be 7.5% in 1 year, in less than 6 months. Okay, and they're going higher. We're at that point that there really is no turning back. Okay, you cannot show weakness, or that'll create even more panic in the system, and people will be running to the banks to get their money, which will not be there. Because, of course, we already know that Credit Suisse and Deutsche Bank are in trouble. Surprise, once again.
That 7.5%, obviously at 7.5%, has a massive implication for the housing market. There's obviously a huge affordability issue naturally with rates at 7.5%, mortgage rates at 7.5%. There's those that can't afford to buy, so the demand gets sucked from the economy or from the property market. As a result, you see a crash in the property market all over, and that seems to be starting to come through. But you're talking about then the 10-year at over 4%, 31 trillion in national debt becomes an even bigger problem with rates over 4%.
Well, I think it's a very big problem, but again, it's a problem that they continue to ignore. And remember, the numbers when they get bigger, if you're working on, say, on a 20% multiplier, the numbers mushroom out of control. But they don't care about debt because they can create more money. This is, if you get to their goal, which in my opinion, their goal is to get to a global digital coin, or a global digital dollar that it can be printed at will, right? I mean, again, what's the difference if you're paying $1 or $10? If they're printing all the money they want, it really doesn't matter. So for them, it's like funny money anyways. I always like to go back. You watch some of these athlete contracts, right, that are gazillions of dollars out into the future. Well, because they're banking on lower value of dollars out in the future. So it really doesn't matter. And that's the way. It's not correct, but that's the way that governments and the Federal Reserve play them.
Now, there's another point I just wanted to track back to there, and you talked about oil, and you said if that this could be solved. That inflation fairly much caused by an elevated oil price. Now, we've had the price of oil well over 100, up to about 130. We've come back now, and we're hovering about kind of 85 at the moment. You're of the opinion that it is the oil price and the energy crisis that is fueling inflation more than any other aspect. Is that right?
100%. First of all, oil should be $30 a barrel. That's where it was the day after the election. Okay. The United States should be a net exporter of oil. The natural resources that we have at our hands, at our disposal, without affecting the environment. Climate change, if you're a believer, I personally am not, but if you're a believer, okay. But you're not going to change the carbon footprint by going back to fracking and shale producing and being a global supplier to the world of oil, not only to ourselves, which would, again, 80% of all goods and services we use have something to do with fossil fuels. So we could bring our costs down, which then immediately drops the inflationary curve down without having to hike rates. It also at the same time helps the UK and Germany with liquefied natural gas, which they're getting screamed on from Russia, because Russia is the dominant player, and have not had any effect from the sanctions, because you can't affect sanctions on anybody unless you cost them money, which nobody has done, because nobody is competing with them for their gas business. Mm-hmm. But if we went back to the ability to be a net export of oil, and oil went down to $30 a barrel, that would bring our costs back into line to where they were 2 years ago. Okay, and we would not have a record number of coal plants being built and burning coal, which is the dirtiest form of energy. But yet nobody wants to talk about that, but they continue to build more coal plants right now globally because it's the cheapest energy source that they can get to.
Okay. And in terms of, obviously, one of the major implications, or one of the major causes of the oil price spike is a lack of fracking, lack of investment in drilling. This is all very much part of the Green New Deal angle. Do you see that Green New Deal persisting, regardless of who's in the White House, or who's in Congress or in the Senate?
No, I think if you get the progressives out, this is more the progressive agenda, but this is also the Biden agenda. Right now, if you get them out, or at least you get a balance of power, right now the power lies with the left, right? Mm-hmm. They're all three houses, of government. I don't want, no matter which side of the aisle you reside on, you don't ever really want one party to have full control, right? You have to have some checks and balances. And again, that's where this election, I think, is going to be very important to where we go. That would help control things, and it could change part of the agenda of where they're trying to go, because what they're trying to do, okay, like I said, if you believe, that's fine, but however, you have to have some sort of a plan. You just can't shut down the oil production, for example, and say, well, we're going to green energy. Well, how are you getting there? How much is it going to cost me? At what time frame are we going to get there? Right? This is what Obama did with the coal plants in 2008. He shut them down in one day and didn't give anybody a chance to get educated or get a job anywhere else. This is totally backwards in how you run a business or an economy or a government. It is just totally torturing the absolute middle class of this country.
I remember a comment or a point that was made by Jordan Peterson at one stage, where he says, when it's difficult to see what the motivation is, have a look at what the result is. And that a lot of times speaks to exactly what the motivation is. Is it a case that they don't have a plan when it comes to compensating for the lack of fossil fuels, or is it potentially that the result that we're getting now is actually part of the plan, if that makes sense?
Well, I do. No, I know exactly what you're asking, and I think that this is part of the destruction. Okay, this is part of the Great Reset, if you want to look at it that way. Okay, because again, they have no plan, and anybody who knows anything about natural building of an organization, this is not something you can do in 12 months or 16 months or 20 months. This is a 10 to 20 to 30 year project that they're trying to do. But yet they cut off the main resource with to begin with, before they got it started. And that's the bigger issue. That shows you how much disregard they have for the average American.
So where does this end?
Well, I mean, it ends pretty ugly, probably. I mean, I think right now we've seen a little recent rally in the markets, but we're still down over 20% for the year. I think the indexes end up, at some point before it's all said and done, 50 to 60 to 70% from where they are, from their highs. I think that you've got a tragedy in loss of income and people that are going to be around. I think you have food riots globally. I think you potentially have the spark for more minor skirmishes or wars around. I think it ends very ugly as it sits now, because one thing we know for sure: you take away people's money and you take away their food, and that never ends well. That's how many of the bad regimes were started, because of those two items, money and food. If they're provided by bad people, they can create bad events to occur from there.
Now we've got inflation not too far off 10% in the States.
You multiply that by 3.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my question. I think you're of the opinion that it is significantly higher than what we're seeing officially. Is that correct?
100%. Listen, the problem is they count food and energy at a very small rate. And other than an emergency, your number one cost to every American family or every family is food and energy. Mm-hmm. Again, barring a major appliance breaking down. But for the most part, we spend more money on food and energy than we spend on anything else, especially at these prices. Yes. So it's totally, the number is totally false.
Do you think that the average investor or the average man in the street understands just how dire things are at the moment and how dire that they are potentially set to get?
No, I don't think they do yet. I think the lower end of the middle class is probably feeling it worse and starting to understand it. But one of the big problems, obviously, is when you become, we'll call it fat and lazy, and everything's just handed to you. It's like, well, it won't affect me, right? And it goes back to the old Martin Niemöller poem, where first they came for them and I didn't do anything, and then they came for them, I didn't do anything, and then they came for me. There was nobody to help. Nobody wants to step up here and say, hey, we need to do something about the area that we're in. And we're in a very rough period. Now, again, I'm banking a lot on the upcoming election, okay, just because we need to have some change. Mm-hmm. And if this doesn't go well, this could get really ugly really quickly.
What's the tipping point for people? When what do you think has to happen for them to realize, okay, we got a problem?
Well, you know the old story, right? Nobody ever reacts until the horse is out of the barn and down the street about 3 blocks, and they want to put up a fence. Mm-hmm. People don't. They won't recognize because they refuse to look until it's way too late, right? Until they're losing money and maybe they've lost their job and they can't make their payment for their house that they got stuck in that they're overpaying for right now. So these things typically, which is what creates more of these collapses, because we continue to take on, more debt. We've got record debt in this country, not the national debt, individual debt, credit card debt. And, at some point, finally, I'm going to get fired. Great. How am I going to make my payments? And then there's no money. And then finally you go, I should have done something sooner. And of course you never do.
What actions are you taking in order to prepare yourself for what's coming?
Well, I'm always invested. I'm always 100% invested in equities as part of my portfolio plan, but I do hedge. I use derivative models to hedge against my portfolio. I know to the exact dollar of the risk I'm taking, and I'm always wanting to accumulate more on the way down. Why? Because again, if I go back in history, United States equities have gone up 8.5% year over year since the beginning of time, and 10% a year since 1950. So I don't have a problem believing that this country is going to at some point come out of it. And that is what earlier I said, every 2 years we get a change. So I'm banking on a change. But I'm a believer in the United States stock market as one of my investments. And I do believe that we will eventually get out of this mess. We've been through, obviously, many bad periods before. And if we don't, I think I got a lot bigger problems than what I have invested in the equity markets.
Indeed. Just bring it back to oil for a second. As I said, we got oil at the moment about $85, $86 a barrel. We've had some OPEC cuts over the last couple of days. Now, they were fairly well priced into the market over the last week. We saw a bit of a rally in oil up to these levels. Do you think that with the structural problems in the oil market and the Green New Deal policies in the States that we are going to see significantly higher oil prices in the future?
Yeah, I think that you're probably going to see, my prognosis is new highs, all-time new highs in oil. I do think, you want a conspiracy theory. Mm-hmm. I think that there's going to be a little play going on into the election. Right. I think the global governments, they're not friends of the United States typically, right? Mm-hmm. There may be allies in some way, but they're not typically friends. And I would think that they would love to see this weak administration stay in power, because so far what they've done is hand over the keys to everything. They've given China more power. Russia's never prospered more. They let this ridiculous war go on, which should have never happened in the first place. Saudi Arabia is booming, and their main company, Aramco, is going to the moon. Biden's out begging Venezuela for oil and our enemies. So I think that you could see some funny stuff happen, and you could see an increase of supply of oil right before the election, about a week before, to drop the prices down. But at the end of the day, you don't think that Saudi Arabia is going to help the United States, do you really? I don't. I think they're going to ram them prices, and I think after they try to play with this election through prices, right, through economy. Once that gets over, I think that oil goes skyrocketing back to the 150 level probably.
And at these elevated levels, then the US has to try and refill its strategic petroleum
reserve, which has never worked ever to help the American public, besides the fact that most of the oil got shipped off to China. You want to talk about ignorance. How can you drain your strategic petroleum reserve, which is really wartime oil, down to 40-year lows? Okay. And how do you plan on refilling it? Okay. At the price you have to pay. Certainly, if they want to go back to fracking and shale producing and allow it again, then they could fill it easily. But again, it doesn't seem to be in this administration's agenda to do it that way.
Puts the US in a fairly vulnerable position, though, doesn't it?
Well, I think they want to be in a vulnerable position. I think this is part of, again, to me, this is part of the scam and the scheme of the Great Reset. I think they're not afraid to be in this position. I think this is almost planned. This is almost like a global plan between the major players trying to bring everybody down into a basket that nobody wants to be in.
So that ultimately we introduce central bank digital coins, or the digital dollar, or a global digital currency, or a couple of global digital currencies, to ultimately have greater control over financial system.
Well, that, and I think that governments want to get a hold of the land as well, the farmland, because I think they want to control the food supply as well as the money. Again, I don't think, government is not good to begin with. Okay. Government is too big and spends too much money, giving too much of it away. The original in our country, the Constitution, we are so far off the Constitution and off of what was supposed to be done that it's becoming a much bigger problem. And, government continues to grow. The federal government was never intended to be the biggest employer in the world.
With everything that you said, what do you think happens to the strength of the US dollar? I mean, we've got it at fairly elevated levels now.
I think it's going higher. Remember, as long as the dollar resides as the reserve currency, which it still is, okay, it is a place where countries run to put some money in. They want safety, they run to the dollar. Everybody talks about they go to bonds. Countries go to the dollar because they're not necessarily worried about yield. They're worried about saving and holding on to what they have. So they're buying dollars because that's still the reserve currency. And I think the dollar, we could see 125 again, up in those levels. I don't really think it means anything because the fiat currency system, because there's no backing to any currency, is fraudulent anyways. The minute we went up the gold standard back here, that was the end of real dollars, what they were really worth. And it's funny because the number one bubble builder in history, Alan Greenspan, he was against going up the gold standard until he became the Fed chair. So it kind of tells you, the power of the Fed chair and the ability to print dollars.
So that's the dollar index at 125 is what you're suggesting. Currently, it's around 110.
I wouldn't be surprised. I don't like to make big projections like that, but I wouldn't be surprised. The dollar's going higher until we see a change in the overall economy. Okay. Until we see a change in the banking system, until we see other changes. Until then, people are going to be afraid because we do have a worldwide recession and probably depression in many places.
And you mentioned there, obviously, a gold-backed currency brings us nicely onto precious metals. One of the things that you're suggesting there is that we see dollar strength because its weakness against all fiat currencies, and that the dollar is probably the best-looking house on a very rundown street.
Right.
How do precious metals play a role in this? How does it unfold for gold and silver going forward?
Well, I think going forward, gold and silver, I think, will perform as always and do very well. They've been in a very rough period, and we've actually been, full disclosure, we've been short the precious metals on a trading basis. Now, again, I want to be clear that I'm an advocate and I have a lot of physical metals, right? I'm a buyer of gold, silver, and platinum all the time. Okay. And I'm an accumulator of those things. But from a trading standpoint, I'll trade either long or short the market. And until the other day, we were short gold and silver. And now we're actually, as of this morning, we're now long gold and silver. Okay. On paper. But again, the paper asset is just a trading vehicle, not necessarily, it was nothing I would ever buy to hold on to for a long term. I don't think there's enough gold or silver in the world to cover the amount of paper that has been put out there. Okay. But overall, I think gold and silver, years from now, maybe a year. It's hard to say when this is going to happen, but there's a better than probably 50-50 chance that you may need gold and silver to buy groceries at some point. Again, this is far, if this continues at its current rate, it's far from over. Okay. And it's far from being easily done. We don't get a lot of the right information from the news sources globally that tell us really what's going on. But if we could get to a point where you might have to use real gold and silver, carry a little bag around with your little change in there and buy groceries with that. I mean, again, you may think I'm out of my mind, but I do believe that that's a real possibility that you may have to use real physical metals again someday.
That brings me nicely around to the question. You told us what you were doing, how you're positioning yourself, and obviously you have the ability to look at things in an awful lot more sophisticated way than the average individual. What's the best thing? What's the best steps that the average individual can take in this situation to protect themselves going forward?
Well, to protect themselves, they have to, if they're going to protect their equities, they have to learn how to hedge. I mean, that's something that we do teach. But I mean, I think that everybody should have some representation of a certain percentage of their worth in gold and silver, but not paper gold and silver, physical. You need to go to, your reputable GoldCore and buy some gold and silver. I mean, you have to own something tangible because we all know what paper assets are. You look at the US dollar that went from a silver certificate to a Federal Reserve note, right? It went from something that was worth something to something that says it was a debt. So, again, I think that everybody should have some representation of physical metals in their possession because, again, I think that you may indeed need that at some point. You need some hard assets, and hard assets are not hard assets on paper. Hard assets are assets you can touch, feel, and smell.
Now, before we wrap up here, Bubba, maybe you can let our subscribers know a little bit more about what it is that you do and where they can find you online.
Great. Yeah. I'm an educator. I'm a professional trader. I've been doing this for 44 years. I was a floor trader for 30 of those years. And of course, if there was still a floor, that's where I'd still be. But we are educators and, teach how to hedge or how to trade futures and, run portfolios and want to really educate the individual investor because so many have been taken advantage of by these promises of gazillions, which is not true. Okay, you have to learn to understand the market and your own emotional self. In the meantime, you can get me at bubbatrading.com. And anybody wants to email me direct, email me at bubba@bubbatrading.com.
Super. Well, what I'm going to do is I'll put a link to your website and the show notes in the description below this video and also your email there as well. And it's been absolutely fantastic talking to you and hope we get an opportunity to catch up with you again soon. But
I would love to. I enjoyed it, and it's a great conversation, and I'm glad you guys are factual and tell it like it is.
Well, thank you very much. But for now, Todd Bubba Horwitz, thanks for joining us on GoldCore TV.
Thank you.
Our thanks to Todd for coming on GoldCore TV and taking the time to speak with us. As ever, we finish the interviews wondering just quite where all of this is going to end up and who the winners are going to be. With all of this uncertainty, it makes me think of something that Todd said just at the end of the interview, that everybody should have a tangible representation of precious metals in their portfolio, because not only is it a great way to protect your wealth from whatever is next on the horizon for the global economy, but you might even just find yourself actually needing to use it one day. If you are interested in adding some gold or silver to your portfolio, then please get in touch with GoldCore. The sign-up process is pretty straightforward, and we also are a super friendly bunch and happy to answer any questions you may have. So head to goldcore.com, your precious metals experts. And if you enjoyed listening to Dave's chats with Todd, then please let us know in the comments below. We do also accept snail mail, but that's slow, and it means everyone else misses out on hearing your own wonderful thoughts and ideas. So comment below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button to be the first to watch the next interview from GoldCore TV. Thank you, and until next time, we will see you then.